The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with cold light and soft sound, as hundreds of alien leaders sat around a glowing table that floated in the middle of the chamber, and every one of them was looking at the blue world that appeared in the air above the center of the table. As the council speaker spoke in a deep, calm voice and said that the humans of Earth had refused to obey the command of the council and had rejected the tribute order, and that this was an act of rebellion against the laws of the stars and the peace of the galaxy. And his words moved across the room like a warning bell because no race had ever refused before. And now a decision had to be made about what to do with the small world that was causing so much noise across space. Among the leaders sat Rethak of the Varn Dominion, a tall-scaled creature with bright yellow eyes that reflected the table's light, and he spoke first and said that the humans had no right to grow as fast as they did, and that their ships and their new weapons were a threat to the balance that had been kept for thousands of years, and that their pride had to be broken before it spread to other young species, and many of the council members agreed with him because they feared that the humans were too wild and too brave to be controlled by the old powers of the stars. But others stayed silent because they had heard stories about humans that did not match the weakness that Rethak spoke of at the center of. The hall stood a single human. She was young and calm, and her name was Claire Adams, and she stood without armor or guards, only with a small device on her wrist that glowed with blue light. And she was the only one from Earth allowed to speak before the council, and even though she stood alone, her face showed no fear and no weakness, and her voice when she spoke was steady and quiet. But every ear in the chamber could hear her as if she was standing next to them. And when she said the words, they cut through the air like a blade, and she said that Earth would not surrender. The silence that followed her words was long and deep until it broke under the sound of laughter, and it came from the high seats where the elder races sat, and their laughter was full of pride and mockery. And one of them said that the human must be mad because Earth had no fleets that could match even one of the council's border guards, and another said that humans were still children playing with fire, but Claire did not speak again until they stopped laughing, and when she did, her voice did not rise, it stayed calm. And she said that Earth had heard such laughter before, and that it never changed anything because humans had faced much worse than this. And she lifted her wrist and pressed a small button, and images filled the air around her, showing human wars and disasters. And she said that through every storm, through every fall and every broken age, humans had survived and learned and fought and built again. The council speaker leaned forward and said that courage was useless when one stood before the power of the galaxy, and he gave the final command that Earth would surrender or be crushed, and he asked her for the last time to accept the terms of the tribute, and Claire looked at him and said no. And then she added that if they came for Earth, they would see something that could not be undone, and that the fire of humans was not a threat. It was a promise, and her words were soft, but they made the room colder, and even Rethak's eyes narrowed as he felt that there was more behind her calm. The council leader gave the signal to end the meeting and ordered her to be removed, but before anyone could move, she touched her wrist again, and a light surrounded her, and she disappeared from the chamber, leaving behind only the faint echo of her last words that said, "If you want war, you will have it." And the room filled again with voices and arguments as the council members shouted about what should be done, and most of them agreed that the time for patience was over, and that the fleets should be sent at once to make an example of Earth back on Earth. The news of the meeting spread faster than light, because every major city was watching the transmission, and the people who saw it felt a strange mix of fear and pride because they had seen one of their own stand before the greatest powers in the galaxy and refuse to bow. And in the command center under the mountains of Colorado, Commander Jack Harris stood in front of a large screen that showed the stars and the movement of unknown ships at the edge of the solar system, and he looked at his officers and said that the time had come to do what humans had always done, which was to stand when others told them to kneel. Beside him stood Captain Laura Green, her face calm but her eyes sharp, as she watched the data flow across the screens, and she asked him quietly if he really thought they had a chance against the council fleets, and he smiled without joy and said that they did not need a chance. They only needed to fight until the galaxy understood that Earth could not be broken, and that was enough. And his words spread through the room like a spark, and every soldier there felt it burn inside them. In the dark space beyond the moon, hidden stations came alive one by one, as massive doors opened and silent shapes drifted out into the void, ships made by human hands in secret, built from steel and stubbornness, and every one of them carried the mark of a planet that had always fought with what it had. The ships were not beautiful, but they were strong and full of fire, and they moved into formation, while on Earth the cities went dark to hide from the coming eyes of the enemy, and the people looked up at the night sky and waited. The council fleets were already on their way from distant stars, their ships glowing like knives in the dark, and their commanders believed that the battle would be short, that Earth would break like glass before their power. But in the deep silence of the human command center, no one spoke of fear. They only spoke of when to strike, because the humans had not built their defenses to survive. They had built them to burn everything that came too close. Claire Adams returned to Earth through a secure gate and walked straight into the command center, where Harris greeted her with a nod, and she said that they were coming, and that the council had already voted for war, and Harris looked at her and said, "Then let them come." And Claire said softly that they would see soon what fire really meant, and the lights of the screens reflected in her eyes as the first warning of incoming ships flashed across the monitors above the planet in the black sea of stars. The first alien vessels appeared, their energy fields shining like storms in the dark, but hidden among the shadows of Earth's orbit. Silent weapons began to wake, and far below in the deep tunnels of the planet, men and women prepared for the moment that would decide if humanity would live free or vanish into dust. The stars were about to witness something they had never seen before, because the humans were not afraid of war. They were born from it, and now they were ready to show the galaxy that no one demanded their surrender and lived to tell the tale. The sky over Earth was silent and dark and full of hidden eyes that watched the edge of the solar system, where the first lights of the enemy fleet were starting to appear. And in the command center, buried under the mountains, Commander Jack Harris stood before a wide screen where the shapes of the alien ships grew larger with every passing minute, and his face showed no fear, only the hard calm of a man who had already accepted what must be done. And beside him, Claire Adams stood with her, arms crossed and her eyes fixed on the same screen, as she said that the council would not stop until the planet was in ruins. And Harris said that then they would have to learn what ruin really looked like when humans decided to fight back. Across the world, the air bases came alive with sound and light, as engines roared and soldiers moved in long lines toward ships that waited under heavy clouds, and from orbit the defense network began to unfold like a vast shield of metal and fire that had been built in secret for years by the united hands of every nation on Earth. And no one outside the planet had ever known that such a force existed, because it was hidden not only by machines, but by silence and patience. And now all of it was waking up at once, because the time for silence was over, far beyond the moon. The first contact happened when the lead ships of the Council fleet entered the outer range of human sensors, and they came with no words of warning, because they believed that the humans would not dare strike first, and so they were moving slow and proud and confident, and that was their first mistake. Because at that same moment, in the deep black of space, a small group of human drones moved out from behind the shadow of a comet and fired their weapons, and bright lines of energy tore across the void, and the first alien cruiser exploded before it even knew it was under attack. And then the rest of the human drones followed in perfect silence, striking fast and vanishing into the dark before the enemy could lock on. The council commander aboard the flagship of the fleet was named Vorin, and he was old and had fought many wars, but he had never faced humans before, and he could not understand how ships so primitive could move unseen and strike with such deadly precision. And when his officers shouted that their sensors were blind, he realized that the humans were using some kind of hidden code that broke through their detection fields. And he shouted for them to bring the fleet into full combat mode, and the void around Earth came alive with light and chaos. Back on the surface of Earth, the people watched the sky as lines of light crossed the heavens like shooting stars, and for the first time in human history, every person on the planet was united not by fear, but by a single thought that they would not fall. And across the cities, screens showed the words from the first message of Claire Adams when she said, "Earth does not surrender," and those words became a symbol that spread from home to home and from heart to heart, and even the children whispered them as if they were prayers, while in orbit the real fire had begun. Captain Laura Green was aboard one of the human warships that hid behind the shadow of Mars, and her crew waited for the order to move, because their ship named Horizon was part of the second wave, And when the command came, she told her people to remember that they were not fighting for power or glory, but for the right to live without chains, and the ship's engines flared bright, and it moved into battle through the dust of Mars like a silent arrow. The aliens had numbers, but the humans had something else that could not be measured because they had been fighting wars since they learned to stand, and they understood loss better than anyone. And every ship that fell only made the rest fight harder, and the battle around the moon became a storm of wreckage and flame. And for every human ship that was lost, 2 alien ships went dark because the humans had no fear of dying. They only feared giving up, and that made them unstoppable. In the council chamber far across the stars, the news of the battle reached Rathak and the other leaders, and they could not believe that the humans had destroyed part of their first fleet. And Rathak shouted that the council must send everything they had to crush the rebellion before it spread, and others argued that the humans were dangerous and different, and should be destroyed completely. And so more fleets were called, and the galaxy began to turn its eyes toward the small blue planet that refused to kneel, back in the command center. Harris listened to the reports from every front, and his officers told him that the enemy was pulling back from the moon, and he said to let them go, because he knew that retreat was only the beginning of something worse, because the council would not accept this loss. And he turned to Claire and said that they needed to prepare for the next wave, which would be larger and stronger. And Claire said that they would be ready, because the fire of Earth had only just begun. In the ruins of an alien cruiser that had fallen into the shadow of Jupiter, a small human team moved through the wreckage searching for data, because every bit of knowledge was power. And when they reached the control room, they found records that showed how the council had planned the attack months before the meeting had even taken place, and that meant the demand for surrender was only a lie to cover their plan to take Earth by force. And when Harris heard this, he felt the quiet anger that humans kept deep inside, and he said that they would show the council what it meant to lie to a race that never forgot. All across the system, the humans worked as one, as if every person had become part of the same heartbeat, building, repairing, fighting, planning. And in the space between Mars and Earth, a new line of ships began to form, bigger and faster and stronger than anything they had used before, because the humans learned fast, and every battle taught them something new, and they used every piece of wreckage, every fallen weapon, every bit of alien tech to grow stronger. The alien fleet returned 3 days later with double the size and with ships that could level moons. But when they came near Earth, they found the planet wrapped in light as the defense grid locked into position and the sky filled with fire once again. And this time the humans did not wait for the enemy to strike. They went out to meet them, and the stars turned red as the second great battle began. On the bridge of the horizon, Captain Green gave the order to fire, and her voice was calm as she said that the time for fear was over, and her ship dove through the wreckage of the first fleet and opened fire with all weapons. And in that moment she thought of Earth, and of the people waiting below, and she swore that no one would take that world while she still breathed. The council commander Voran saw his ships fall one after another, and he began to understand that this war was not like any other, because the humans did not fight to win. They fought because they refused to lose, and he sent a final message to the council saying that if they did not stop this war soon, it would consume them all. But the message was never received because his ship was hit and vanished in a bright burst of flame. As the battle ended and the silence returned to the stars, Harris stood before the screen again, watching the wreckage drift across the black sky, and he knew that it was only the beginning, because the council would come again and again until one side was gone. And he said quietly that humans had never been good at surrender, but they had always been very good at surviving. And Claire, standing beside him, said, "Then we will survive, and make them remember this day for as long as the stars burn, and far above the planet." The last fires of battle faded into the dark, leaving behind only the glow of broken ships and the quiet promise that humanity had made to the galaxy, that they would never kneel, no matter the cost. The war between Earth and the Council had entered its second stage, and the stars had become a place of constant fire and silence, as both sides searched for control. And in the command center under the mountains, Commander Jack Harris stood before a map of the solar system and watched the markers of ships moving slowly across it, and every light that blinked was a life, a story, a fight. And he knew that many of those lights would soon go dark, but his face stayed calm, because he had no time. for fear and only time for action. And beside him, Claire Adams looked at the same map, her hands folded behind her back, as she said that the Council would soon bring their full fleets, and that they would not stop until Earth was burned to dust. And Harris said that then they would show them that dust could still burn back. In orbit above Earth, the human defense network was growing stronger every day, as engineers and soldiers worked without rest to repair damaged ships and build new ones. And the stations that circled the planet were now connected into one great web of weapons and shields, ready to strike at any enemy that came too close, and far beyond them. Hidden among asteroids were secret human bases where new technology was being tested using pieces of alien wreckage recovered from the first battles. And every test brought something new and dangerous to life because humans learned faster than any other race. And they were not afraid to use whatever they found to survive on. The other side of the war, the Council fleets regrouped near the gas giant Zorath, a place where they could repair and plan. And there the commanders argued among themselves because many of them had not expected the humans to fight with such strength, and they could not understand how a single world could hold against so many. But Rathak, who had pushed for war, refused to admit defeat, and said that it was only because they had underestimated the humans, and that the next attack would crush them completely. And he ordered that all remaining fleets be combined into one massive force that would enter the solar system together and end the war in a single strike. News of this reached Earth through captured transmissions, and Harris called his officers together and said that they had only days before the largest fleet in history arrived, and he told them that they could not win by meeting it head-on, because the enemy had more ships and more power, but they could win by thinking like humans and fighting the way only humans knew how. And that meant using surprise and speed and the anger that burned inside them. And Claire, who had been silent for most of the meeting, said that if the Council wanted to bring their fire, then Earth would meet it with a storm far from the planet on a small ship named Falcon. Captain Laura Green led a group of volunteers on a dangerous mission to the edge of the system where the enemy was expected to arrive, and their job was to draw the attention of the first wave and delay them long enough for Earth to prepare. And when she spoke to her crew, she told them that their mission might be the last thing they ever did, but that it would give the rest of humanity time to live and fight. And every person on that ship understood and nodded because they knew what they were fighting for. And when the Falcon left the shadow of Neptune, it went straight toward the place where the stars were starting to shine with the light of the incoming fleet. The Council fleet appeared in perfect formation, their ships glowing with power and their weapons ready to fire. And they saw the small human vessel ahead and did not even slow down because they believed it could do nothing against them. But when the Falcon got close, it released hundreds of small drones that scattered in every direction, and each one carried a charge built from stolen alien energy. And when they exploded, the shock waves rippled through space, and the shields of the Council ships flickered and fell for only a few seconds. But those seconds were enough for the Falcon to strike, and its weapons hit the lead ships, breaking them apart before the others even realized what had happened. Back on Earth, the command center watched the battle through distant sensors, and when they saw the flashes of light, Harris knew that the Falcon had done its job. And he said quietly that Captain Green had given them the time they needed, and he ordered the main fleet to move into position around the Moon and Mars, and to prepare for full engagement. And the men and women of Earth, who had been waiting for days now, stood ready at their stations as the largest armada ever built by human hands formed in silence across the black sky. When the Council fleet reached the inner system, they expected to find Earth defenseless, but instead they found a storm waiting for them, because the humans had covered every approach with traps and hidden weapons, and the space between the planets turned into a maze of fire and steel, and for every alien ship that advanced, another one vanished in explosions that lit the darkness, and the humans fought without rest and without mercy, because they knew there was no retreat and no surrender, and their courage began to turn the tide. In the middle of the chaos, Claire was aboard one of the communication ships keeping contact between the different fleets, and when a nearby cruiser was hit, she ordered her pilot to move closer and help rescue survivors. Even though it was dangerous, and as they pulled people aboard, she looked out at the burning sky and felt both pride and sadness, because she knew how many lives were being lost, but also how much strength was being shown. And she whispered that, if this was the price of freedom, then it would be paid without hesitation. The battle lasted for hours, and then for days, and the stars around Earth were filled with wreckage and smoke, and the Council forces began to break apart because they were not used to enemies that fought without fear, and one by one their ships retreated until only a few remained near the edge of the system, and those few turned and fled into the deep dark to warn the others that Earth could not be conquered when the last alien ship vanished from the radar. There was silence across every channel, and then a single cheer rose from the human fleet and spread across the system from ship to ship and from station to station until the whole of Earth could hear it. And in every city, people came out of shelters and looked up at the sky where the auroras of battle still shimmered, and they knew that they had done the impossible again. They had stood against the galaxy and survived. In the command center, Harris looked at Claire and said that they had won this round, but the war was not over because the Council would return. And Claire said that she knew. But now the galaxy had seen what humans could do, and that fear would spread faster than their fleets. And Harris nodded and said that from now on the galaxy would remember Earth not as a weak young world, but as a fire that refused to die far away in the darkness. Rathak stood on the bridge of his new flagship, watching the reports of the destruction of his fleets, and his pride turned to cold hatred, and he swore that he would return to Earth and burn it completely, even if it took the rest of his life. And the other commanders around him listened in silence because they had seen what humans could do. And even though they obeyed his orders, they feared that this war had already awakened something that could never be stopped. And back on Earth, as the sun rose over the battered blue planet, the people watched its light spread across the sky, and for the first time in history, every person on Earth shared the same thought, that they were not alone anymore, and that the stars belonged to them too, and they would never again bow to anyone who tried to take that away. The Council had retreated beyond the edges of the known systems, but Earth did not rest because everyone knew the enemy would return stronger and more determined, and so Commander Jack Harris ordered the fleets to remain in formation, and every ship and station to stay ready for the next attack, and Claire Adams moved among the command teams, checking communication lines and ensuring that every human force knew their place and task. Because in war, preparation was as important as courage, and she would not allow a single mistake in orbit above the moon. New warships were being deployed. From hidden hangars, and engineers worked without pause to repair damage from the last battle and to upgrade weapon systems using alien technology recovered from destroyed ships, and every modification was tested immediately in simulation to ensure that the humans would strike faster and harder than ever before. And when Captain Laura Green oversaw the launch of the newest fighter squadron, she felt a strange pride, knowing that every pilot on board understood that this mission might be the most dangerous of their lives, but also the most important. The humans had learned quickly from the first encounter, and they were no longer just defending Earth. They were preparing to take the fight to the Council fleet before it could form its massive strike, and Harris called a meeting with his top officers and said that intelligence reports showed the Council would attempt to gather its full fleet near the Zorath system, and that if they allowed it to happen, the second attack on Earth would be devastating. And Claire said that then they would have to stop it before it reached the inner systems, and the officers nodded because everyone knew there was no other choice. Scout ships left Earth's orbit and raced toward the far systems, moving in silence to avoid detection. And when the first human drones spotted the Council fleet assembling, they relayed the coordinates back to Earth, and the humans prepared their ambush, and every ship, from small fighters to massive cruisers, took its assigned position as if pieces on a chessboard. And Harris knew that timing was everything, because the Council had never faced opponents who could coordinate with such precision and such patience at the same time. On the Council flagship, Voran watched the movements of human scouts and could not believe what he was seeing, because the humans had somehow found a way to strike with speed and accuracy that no other young race could manage, and he ordered all fleets to form into combat positions. But the humans had anticipated this and had already set traps along the paths to Earth and to Zorath, and when the first Council ships entered the ambush zone, explosions tore through their shields and hulls, faster than the commanders could react. The humans moved with a discipline born from centuries of survival, striking where the Council least expected and retreating into darkness before the enemy could target them. And every battle was a test of strategy and skill and courage, and soon, entire wings of the Council fleet were being destroyed without the humans losing a single major ship, and Harris watched it unfold on the command screens and said quietly that now they were showing the Council that humans were not just defenders, they were hunters. and the fire of Earth would consume anything that threatened them on one of the leading human warships. Captain Green led her squadron into the heart of the Council fleet, using high-speed maneuvers and surprise attacks to destroy supply ships and disrupt communication lines. And when her squadron returned, they had completed their mission without a single loss, and she reported back that the enemy morale would be shaken. And Harris smiled and said that fear was now on their side, and Claire added that this was only the beginning, and that every council commander would remember the day humanity showed what fire truly meant in the middle of the battle. The council tried to bring overwhelming force to crush the humans by concentrating every remaining ship near the asteroid field, close to the Zorath system. But the humans had planned for this, and the field was filled with hidden mines and ambush points, and the council ships walked blindly into the trap, and one by one their engines were torn apart, and their weapons destroyed, and the stars filled with debris as humans controlled the flow of destruction with precision and patience that the aliens had never seen before on Earth. People watched the news reports from the edge of the solar system as transmissions showed the council fleets being destroyed far from their planet, and every human citizen felt pride and hope, and the belief that their world could survive anything. And in the command center, Harris and Claire spoke quietly about the victory and the cost, because hundreds of human lives had been lost, and every life was sacred. But they also knew that the Council could not be allowed to strike Earth again, unchallenged, and that humanity had to press its advantage. As the smoke of battle cleared, the remaining Council forces tried to retreat and hide among uncharted systems, but the humans had scouts and ships ready to follow them and prevent regrouping, and Harris ordered the human fleets to pursue with care to prevent ambushes, but to also make sure that the Council would never gather strength again, and Claire coordinated with distant units to make sure every path of escape was monitored, and every strike was precise. For the first time, the Council began to understand the full scope of human determination, because the young race they had underestimated was now demonstrating skill, strategy, and courage that could match entire fleets. And Vorin on the flagship realized that the humans had done what no one else had ever done. They had turned the table and made the Council fleets afraid to approach Earth at all. And for the first time, he felt doubt and fear that their plans might fail completely. The victory at Zorath became the turning point of the war, because the humans had shown that no matter the size of the enemy, their fire could strike anywhere, and with deadly force and on Earth. The people celebrated quietly in their homes and on the streets, knowing that the skies above them were safer for a time, because of the courage and skill of every soldier, pilot, and officer. And they whispered to each other that humanity was not just surviving, it was becoming a force that the galaxy would never forget. Harris and Claire looked at the reports from all units and said that the next steps must be careful, because even though this battle was won, the Council would return, and they would bring more ships, more power, and more hatred. But the humans had proven that strategy, courage, and unity could overcome any force. And Claire said that if the Council came again, they would be met not just with defense but with the fire of an entire planet. And Harris nodded and said that this fire would burn across the stars until no one dared threaten Earth again. Far across the galaxy, Rathak and the other Council leaders received the reports of their losses, and they could not hide their shock, because the humans had destroyed far more ships than they had ever expected, and even the most senior commanders feared that if the humans continued this way, their empires would be at risk, and they swore that they would return in full force. But even in their minds, a seed of doubt had been planted, and every one of them knew that the humans were no longer weak or predictable, and that the war had changed forever. And on Earth, as the sun rose over the blue and green planet, people looked at the light with pride because the battle had been won. The skies were safer, and humanity had proven once again that it would never kneel, never surrender, and never be broken because its fire burned too bright to be extinguished. The Council had withdrawn far into the depths of the galaxy after their defeat near Zorath, but Earth remained on high alert, because everyone knew that they would return with more ships and more power, and this time they would not underestimate humanity again. And Commander Jack Harris stood in the command center looking at the maps and reports as they updated in real time. And he said that they had bought time, but the war was not yet over. And Claire Adams nodded and replied that they would be ready, and that every human would stand and fight because surrender was not an option for their world. Across the orbital fleets, Ships repaired and rearmed themselves after the recent battles, and engineers worked without pause to incorporate new technology from captured alien vessels, and every modification made the human forces stronger, faster, more capable of striking. Before the Council could react, and Captain Laura Green led training exercises for pilots and crew who would be part of the next engagement, and she reminded them that every human who flew that day carried the hope of the entire planet on their shoulders, and that failure was not permitted. Intelligence reports showed that the Council had begun rebuilding their fleets in distant systems, and that they had learned from previous mistakes, and this made every officer in the human command understand that the coming battle would be larger and deadlier than any they had faced so far. And Harris called a meeting with his top commanders and said that they must plan carefully and strike strategically, and Claire added that the humans had something the Council could not understand: the determination to survive and to fight no matter the odds. Meanwhile, on the Council flagship, Rathok and Vorin argued and planned as they saw their forces dwindling in previous encounters, and for the first time, doubt had entered their minds, because they had faced a race that could not be intimidated and could not be broken, and they swore that when they returned to Earth, their attack would be overwhelming and final. And yet, even as they planned, a seed of fear had been planted, because they knew that the humans had proven that their fire could destroy any fleet no matter how powerful. The humans knew that they could not wait for the Council to bring destruction to their skies again, so they took the fight to the enemy by sending scout fleets to monitor movements and strike where weaknesses were found, and Harris coordinated with every fleet commander and every squadron leader to create a complex network of attacks that could intercept the Council forces before they reached the inner systems. And Claire managed the communication lines, ensuring that every human ship could act instantly on orders. When the Council fleet finally began its advance from the far systems, they were met by the human ambush that had been carefully prepared, and the battle began not with hesitation, but with precision, because the humans had studied the movements and strategy of the Council and knew exactly how to exploit every weakness and every distraction, and soon the Council ships found themselves under relentless attack from every side, and their numbers began to crumble under the force of the human strikes. Captain Green led a strike team through the heart of the enemy formation, targeting command and supply ships, and every explosion they caused disrupted the rest of the fleet, as humans moved in waves, striking quickly and retreating before the aliens could respond effectively. And Harris watched the operation unfold on the screens and said quietly that this was the moment humanity had prepared for, when the young blue world would prove that no empire in the galaxy could command it without paying a heavy price on Earth. People watched the skies through satellites and news transmissions, and even though most were far from the battle, they felt the same courage that drove the soldiers and pilots in space, because every explosion and every strike reminded them that their world could not be conquered, and that humans would not kneel no matter the threat. And in homes and streets across the planet, people whispered that the fire of humanity had spread beyond their skies and into the hearts of everyone alive. The Council fleet began to break apart as their leaders realized that their attacks were failing, and that every new ship they sent forward was destroyed before it could reach Earth. And Rathok felt his anger turn to disbelief, because for the first time, he could not understand the human strategy or their resolve. And even Vorin admitted that the fire of Earth could not be stopped by conventional means, and that no matter how many ships they built, the humans would find a way to meet them with fire of their own. Harris ordered the human forces to press their advantage and to pursue the remaining Council ships to ensure that they could never regroup to launch another attack, and the fleets moved across the stars with precision, striking outposts and remaining fleets that tried to hide among asteroids and uncharted systems, and every victory reinforced the idea that humans were no ordinary species, because they combined courage with intelligence and patience, and every battle became a lesson that could not be ignored. Claire coordinated communication between scattered units and ensured that every human pilot and officer knew their task, and every ship knew where to strike and when to retreat. And as the battle reached its climax, the Council's remaining forces were surrounded and outmatched, and they began to retreat deeper into unknown space, hoping to survive and regroup. But the humans followed cautiously, ensuring that no escape route remained unmonitored, and that every victory could be converted into permanent advantage. In the middle of the final battle, Captain Green led her squadron on a daring mission to disable the Council flagship, and the strike was precise and effective, and the ship was destroyed in a massive explosion that lit the surrounding stars and sent shockwaves across the remaining fleet. And as the flagship fell, the Council forces realized that Earth was no longer a planet to be taken lightly, and that the humans had turned their defiance into a force that could not be ignored or defeated by fear back on Earth. Harris and Claire observed the final retreat of the Council forces and realized that the war was won not only by force but by the will of the human species. And Harris said that the Council had underestimated the fire that lived in humans, and Claire replied that it was a fire that would never die because it was born from survival and unity and courage. And from that moment forward, the galaxy would remember that Earth did not surrender, and that no power could force it to bow. The people of Earth celebrated quietly but with pride, because they understood that their victory was built on courage and sacrifice, and that the war had shown every human that their planet belonged to them, and that their fire would always protect it. And as they looked at the skies, they whispered that they had not just survived, they had unleashed a power that the galaxy would never forget, and that any who tried to threaten them would see the fire of humanity again. Far across the stars, the Council fleet regrouped in distant systems, and the leaders could not hide their fear, because the humans had shown them something that no empire had faced before: a species that refused to bow, refused to surrender, and fought with the intelligence, courage, and unity that made them unstoppable. And even as the Council plotted their next moves, they knew deep down that Earth would never be conquered, and that the fire of humanity had already burned its mark into the galaxy. And on Earth, as the sun rose over the quiet blue planet, the people looked to the skies and knew that they had won a war that could have destroyed them, but instead had made them stronger and united, and that from now on, no voice in the galaxy would dare demand their surrender, because humanity had shown its fire and it would burn forever.